Good morning and welcome to the 6th Annual BRN School Survey Overview webinar. My name is Lisel Blash. I am a research analyst with the University of California, San Francisco, and I'm the person who is administering the survey on behalf of the California Board of Registered Nursing. I'm going to go over some housekeeping tips with you before handing this presentation back to Stephen Wong with the Board of Registered Nursing, who will tell you a little bit about the history and importance of this survey. First off, you will need to select an audio option. Of course, you can't hear this if you haven't selected an audio option, but I've printed it up here on the slide for those of you who are entering the webinar now. Everyone is muted on entry. You can unmute yourself, but we'd like you to stay muted unless you have a question to ask because it just cuts down on background noise. There is also, so I'm going to show you that, the red circle is going around the mute, unmute button and also the video, stop video button. You can also put your video up if you want other people to see you or just keep it off if you like. There's also a chat box on the lower part of the screen, which now also has a red circle around it. And that's where you could ask questions either about technical difficulty or questions about the webinar itself or about the survey. You can also post topic or subject area questions, or like I said, you could unmute yourself and ask live. And finally, I'm just going to note that this year we're going to do just PowerPoint slides. If we have time, we'll do a live demonstration. We'll see how it goes. So I'd now like to hand this back to Stephen Wong with the California Board of Registered Nursing to go over some of the background of the survey.
The BRN has been conducting the annual school survey for about 27 years, and in 2004, it became a consolidated survey between the BRN and other stakeholders. We do have a NEWAC education subgroup going on, and in 2005 to 2006, we began contracting with the UCSF and did a online survey administration. Next slide. There is an important for consistent questions and current issues. That's why we have these surveys year after year. There's also a feedback and revision process. You can talk to your representatives for the NEWAC education subgroup work group review, or you can email your recommendations to me or the NECs. Next slide. And the data they collected is used in a lot of ways. Workforce planning for employers like hospitals. State and federal agencies do use the data for programs and data reporting. Law and policymakers, such as the community college district, uses the data for planning also and policy decisions. Of course, nursing agencies like the ANA and stakeholders use it for various purposes too. And educators, including all of the hired programs, use that for programs and policy decisions. And of course, we do get occasional, requests from students or researchers for research purposes. And sometimes we get, questions from the general public. Okay, the survey actually may be the only resource available for some of this data. It does provide evidence-based data for sound workforce and fiscal planning. We do something called trend analysis, where we look at data over time and graphically look at the trends, if you want to put it that way. I want to emphasize the accuracy of data collected is important. The community colleges and other state agencies do use this data. So, if it can be as accurate as possible, everybody would appreciate that. And of course, if you see any issues with the survey or you have any recommendations, basically, just give us your feedback, and your feedback is most welcome. Next slide. Okay, I guess I'll turn that back over to you, Lisel.
Okay, so the survey time period, you'll see this noted a number of times in the survey, is August 1st through July 31st. So for this survey, we're covering August 1st, 2019 through July 31st, 2020. There is a little bit of a different time frame for the census data, and that is 2019 to 20, for 2019 to 20, it's October 15th, 2020. And people always sort of say, are you sure it wasn't 2019? And no, we always do it the year that we're actually doing the survey. And since it's been that way for a long time, I just keep it that way to keep it consistent. And then the final really important date you need to know is the due date, which is this year, November 16th, 2020. And the reason it's the 16th instead of the 15th is that the 16th falls on a Monday. So we didn't want to have it due on a Sunday. And okay, so I'm going to go over a little bit of the overview of the survey format. I sort of sent you, I think, 3 emails so far. And well, the first email was really about announcing this webinar and also announcing that the PDF of the survey was online and sending the link for that. The second email that you should have received is one that looks like this, and this comes directly out of the Qualtrics software, and it's inviting you to take the survey and giving you the survey link for your school. And this email is really important. You should save it, or at least save the link, because most people want to go in and out of the survey as they gather data rather than doing it all at once. And you know, as long as that survey isn't submitted, you can go back in multiple times. It should be saving your data and allowing you to continue to add data or change data as you go along. The third email that I sent was an email that double checked that you actually got the survey link. And part of the reason that I do that is that some folks don't actually get the survey link. Either it goes into their spam filter or a firewall blocks it. And that happens a little bit every year. So I just sort of try to make sure that people actually receive their survey. And the other thing that last email did was to announce that we're going to have another webinar on the 13th because we realize there's an important conference going on right now that would mean that a number of our schools' ADN programs might not be attending. So we wanted to make sure that everyone has the option to take part in the webinar. So the second webinar will be just like this one. It's just that it's for people who couldn't attend today's. Okay. So this is the subject line on that email. In case you have lost that email, you might want to search for it. And of course, you can always write me and ask for me to send you the link again. And the other thing I did want to also note is that with this particular email and this survey link, this link is unique to your school. So you can share it with other people within your school to do parts of the data collection and data entry, but it's really important that you not share it with another school. You know, each school will get their own link. If you have a friend at another school who didn't get a link, you know, have them contact me and I'll send them a link. But if you send this link that is for your school to them, then they might type over your data or add their data to your data and it'll be kind of a mess. So don't do that. So the first page that you will encounter is the information sheet, which is basically the informed consent for this survey. And, you know, people have seen this every year. It's kind of boilerplate, but it just sort of tells you what to expect. And once you hit the next page button at the bottom of this page, you will, in fact, have assented to research. And, you know, that just sort of says you understand what you're getting into. But I want to reiterate with people that, you know, you can choose to not answer questions and et cetera. We'd prefer that you answer all the questions because it's really important, but you do have rights as a survey subject, and that's really what this page is about. So after you hit the next page button on this page, you get another long and wordy page. However, this again is important because it tells you a little bit about navigating the online survey. And there are a couple of key items here that I wanted to point out. First off, where there is this little red outline at the top of the page here, that doesn't actually appear on the survey, but I just put that here to highlight that we have links to a definitions page that will allow you to look up the definitions of certain key subjects in the survey and how we're defining them. And then second, there's a technical support page that includes some questions about the survey itself, how to complete it, and we will add to that technical support page any important questions that come up as a result of this webinar today and the one next week, so that we can make sure that everybody has answers to common questions that come up. I did want to point out that when we sent this survey out, for whatever reason, the links that are indicated on this page that say click here to get to the PDF of the survey, they were broken. So anybody who opened the survey before I was able to change that will not be able to click on that and get to the PDFs of the survey. People who opened it a little later should be able to get a link that will take them to the survey. But I'm just going to reiterate that the links to the PDF were in 2 different emails that I sent you, and I'll also put the URL on the screen for a second in case you need to write that down. And so it's pretty simple, and this should take you to the PDF versions. We do encourage people to print out those segments of the survey that are relevant to them, and those would be the pre and or post-licensure program survey. The institutional information is extremely important, and then you probably really want to print out the sections that relate to the programs that you have at your school. There is a survey process questionnaire, which you maybe don't have to print out, but you probably should do as part of the survey, and various other things that might be useful to you. Okay, so when you get into your survey, after you've gone through those 2 pages of sort of boilerplate, you'll get to this page here. And this page is the start of a section called Institutional Information. This is a very important section because this basically sets up the survey for you. So whatever you tell it here is going to decide what types of program surveys to give you. And it's pretty important to fill this out fully and accurately. So of course, the first question we ask is, what's the name of your university or college? And it's a long pull down list. And you should be able to find your school's name here. If you can't, way down at the bottom, there is an other category. And if you select other, it will pop up a little box that lets you fill that in, type it in. And I'm going to note something about this particular page. This page has just 1 question on it. And the reason this page has just 1 question has to do with the way the software works to sort of pop up that box on the next page. Generally speaking, I have tried to make this survey so that as many questions as possible appear on 1 page, because I had some comments from people that they felt like there was too much clicking through. And there are pros and cons to that approach. So if you do have a short page, it's probably because there's something special about the software and the skip patterns that's happening on that page. But we tried harder this year than ever before to put everything on 1 page. Okay, so the other really important question you're going to get in the institutional information section is this one that asks you about what kinds of programs you have. So it's actually 2 questions. So you need to select at least 1 program type to move forward through the survey effectively. You should actually put in all of the program types you have here, because otherwise you won't get surveys about them. And I did want to note that this is, I'm not sure if everyone's seeing both of these on their screen. My screen, for some reason, is not showing is cutting off a little bit of the bottom slide here, but we did add a separate section this year. We split the DNP survey from a research-based doctoral program survey or PhD program, just because we had some feedback that those are programs that are significantly different and might require slightly different surveys. So that's 1 change this year. Okay, and then the ADN program button, this has always been here, but I tend to like to reiterate this because every year it seems like there's a little bit of confusion about what happens with ADN programs. So if you select an ADN program as one of your programs, you get an additional question. And that is, do you admit generic students into your ADN program? So if you admit generic students, that means you have a regular ADN program. So say yes. If you do not, and you have an LVN to ADN only program, then you want to select no. And I think there's only 7 LVN to ADN only programs. So most people with an ADN program will be selecting yes, but about 7 programs will be selecting no. And that will give you a slightly different survey based on which of those things you select. Then you have a final question in this section, which is, do any of your nursing programs have at least 1 pre-licensure registered nursing student at a satellite or alternative campus that is located in a different county than your home campus? So if you have a satellite program or an extra office that's, or set of classrooms that's somewhere off the main campus, but in the county that the main campus is in, don't select this. But if it's in a different county, select this. You'll get a question that asks you what counties those satellites are in. But either way, this is pretty much the end of the institutional information section that sets up the survey for you. And let's see. So are there any questions so far? You can unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat box. Okay. So I'm not seeing any questions so far. So let me move on to the next section. Once you have made your way past the institutional information section, you will get a list of all the sections you need to fill out. And this is basically your table of contents. One thing I'm going to note about this table of contents, if you look up at the top where it says survey sections, you are, oh, I see some chat questions, just a sec. Did not receive, okay. Yes, so I'm going to just answer a couple questions really quick. So one person says they did not receive the survey link, so I'll make sure to note that person down and send them the survey link. Thank you so much. This is really good to know. Another person says, when you start the survey, does it save and can you go back and finish? Yes, it does. And I've filled it out, and even if I've closed it while I was filling out a page, it saved that information. But generally speaking, it tells you that you either want to advance a page or go back a page before closing, just to make sure that it actually saves that information. But generally speaking, yes, you can go in and out. And I think it's often easier because it's just a long survey to go in and out. And somebody else says, what are the dates again for the timeline of the survey, not the deadline? Okay, so the timeline of the survey, I always have to remind myself of this because, yeah, it's for this year, it's August 1st, 2019 to July 31st, 2020. And that's for most of the information in the survey. That's the time period covered, except for the census. And the census section will be asking you about information on October 15th, 2020. So I hope that answers some of the first questions so far. And I'm going to mention that those dates are reiterated throughout this survey. Okay, so one thing that doesn't appear in survey sections when you first get this table of contents is institutional information, which is the section you just filled out. And in the past, this was really a problem because sometimes people would fill something out and then they say, oh my goodness, I actually have a regular ADN program and not an LVN to ADN. Like, what do I do? And I'd end up like sending them a different survey. This time you can actually, they've improved something over the last 2 years. So you can actually go back. You won't see that section listed here, but, and I can't show you the bottom of the page just yet, but at the bottom of the page, there is a little button that says previous page. And at this point, if you needed to go back or any point, you could keep hitting previous page and it would take you back through the institutional information. You could change your programs and whatever information you needed to fill out. The other thing I also want to caution people about, I just remembered I was going to tell people about the page where we have the names of the schools, is that occasionally people, because it's a long list and some of the school names are very similar, people will select the wrong name for their college. So please make sure that you select the right name for your college. One year I had really strange data and I was just, racking my brains trying to figure out why the data seemed so different for that school. And then I realized from looking at the email address of the person who'd sent it that they had just selected one school down from their actual school. So it's kind of important. Okay, so survey sections. Besides the fact that you could go back and change your institutional information at this point, you're getting a list of all of the sections you will need to fill out based on the answers you gave in the institutional information section. So it's a good idea to kind of check this out and make sure that you've got the right programs and whatnot. I'm going to note that we split the pre-licensure and post-licensure program survey. Again, last year, and I think the year before, we tried to combine them. That was causing some data difficulties, so we're going to try splitting them again this year. However, I've tried to set it up, and I'll show you in a minute how, so that you don't have to fill out the director information twice if you have a pre and post licensure program with the same director. So, pre-licensure programs are going to have to fill out the first 3 sections highlighted or circled above, and post-licensure programs have a very similar set of sections, minus the student attrition and recruitment and retention factors section. And the other thing I'll note about this table of contents is that it should pretty much show you in each one of these sections what question numbers it covers within that particular program survey. And I'm hoping that's helpful because it should help you correspond the PDF to the ways that I've divided the survey up inside of the software. The other thing is if you're looking at all these segments and saying, oh my goodness, that's so many segments. We split it up into segments because it used to be that, you know, the entire BSN survey would be one big chunk. And then the entire MSN survey would be one big chunk. And people were having a really hard time navigating through that, finding questions. They hated having to click through, you know, 20 questions to get to the question that they needed to answer. So we've tried to break it up into slightly smaller pieces. Sometimes that causes, you know, sometimes people miss stuff. That's a little bit of a problem, but in general, I think it's better. And I see one more question, so I'm gonna go up there and grab that. Okay, oh, somebody said thank you, okay. Oh, yeah, great. Thanks, Stephen. So it's really great that if you get the PDF of the survey, you can download it and start putting your information in there so you make sure you got it right, because this is a long online tool, and then you can fill it in. Also, you can share those survey sections with your colleagues in advance, and they can send data back to you before you put it into the survey itself. All right. Okay, so there's one thing that I wanted to explain, and that is survey validation. And people kind of know about this, but it tends to drive some people nuts. And I wanted to give a little bit of a better explanation about that. So there are some questions where, unless you give an answer, or unless you give an answer that corresponds to something that we need to know about, it won't let you move forward. And the reason we do that is that in the past, I didn't have survey validation on some of these questions, but then people would skip some of them, or I would get data that really didn't make sense because somebody forgot to fill something out. And then, you know, after a number of phone calls and whatnot, I'd have to go back in and, you know, program in changes, and it was really a little messy. So for some questions that are very important, we have built-in survey validation. So there are some, like enrollment, I think it won't let you move forward unless you put a number in that box. There are other questions, like questions where we ask you to add something up to 100%. If the percents that you put in those boxes don't equal 100%, it won't let you move forward. And then there's another type where it won't let you move forward if the question doesn't match a number that we think you gave previously. So for instance, if you told us that you had 100 students enroll, and then we gave you the demographics questions, which are race and ethnicity, gender, and age, and you fill those out, and any one of them didn't equal 100, it's going to stop and say, wait a minute, you said you had 100 new enrollees, how come you're telling me you have 93? It doesn't quite say that, but that's kind of what it means. And there's some ways to trick it. I probably shouldn't tell people this, but I do, because sometimes people really don't know yet. So occasionally, like, I'll put director, if I'm like testing the survey, you could put 100% in other, you know, and just like scoot ahead until you have all your percents lined up. You just have to remember that we're going to come back to that question and actually fix the data later. The other, or like, so for instance, sometimes people will put 100% or all of their students into unknown, just because right now they don't have time to look for the race and ethnicity. They're waiting for someone to give them that information. So they put the total number of students, like 98 or whatever it is, into the other box or the unknown box. And then later they come back and fix it. So that works. The downside of having the pages with the very long scroll is that basically, if you do have something where you didn't answer the question the way the survey was expecting you to, and it halts you, sometimes you have got to kind of go back and search up and down that page for these little red things that say, this is why we're not letting you move forward. So that's the one downside. I think otherwise it's a pretty good strategy. Okay. So let me talk a little bit more about the administration and staffing sections in the pre and post licensure sections. So we've kind of struggled with this over the years, just because we'd like to get separate counts of faculty and staff in the pre-licensure and post-licensure programs if a school has both types. And so, as I said, we kind of split this apart again. And If you have both a pre-licensure and a post-licensure program and you have a different director for each, you're going to fill out the information about each director in a different section this time around. If you have the same director for both pre and post-licensure programs, just provide that information for that director in the pre-licensure section, and I'll show you how that works. So if you have a pre and post-licensure program, you will get this question. Do your pre and post-licensure programs both have the same director? If you say no, like I said, you're going to fill out the pre-licensure director information in the pre-licensure program survey and the post-licensure director information in the post-licensure program survey. If you say yes, it's the same director for both, then you just fill it out once in pre-licensure. If you only have a pre-licensure program, you're just going to get this. You're not going to get that question about, whether or not you have the same director, because of course you just have the director for the pre-licensure program, and it's the same if you just have a post-licensure program. Okay, let me check the chat really quickly here. Okay, so there is a question about Middle Eastern, and I believe we usually do put Middle Eastern into the Caucasian ethnic category. I'd like to check the definitions on that. We have a definition page, and I'm fairly certain that's not actually delineated in there. If you feel that that doesn't fit, you could also put it in the other category. And then there's another question, is the director on file with the BRN? Okay, so I'm the director of the BRN now, but we have a department chair for the undergraduate and graduate. Stephen, can you answer that? Oh, good, okay. And he says, so the director is the director on file with the BRN, is that the answer to this? Let's see. Stephen, I'm wondering, is it the director on file that they put in, or the person that is? Aha, okay. Oh, so it is the director on file. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me go back for a second here. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question. One of the questions that we have to go over, just because it tends to be a little confusing. We have a question about how many assistant directors do you have? And if you have both a pre and post-licensure program, you'll get a little bit different type of question than if you have just a pre-licensure program. So this is what it looks like if you have just a pre-licensure program, and it says pre-licensure only assistant directors. However, if you have both a pre and post-licensure program, you are going to get a question about assistant directors that serve both programs. So here, if you have an assistant director that serves both the pre and post-licensure program, we'd like to have that person placed here. However, if you have an assistant director that serves only the post-licensure program, don't put them here, because that question will be asked later in the survey in the post-licensure programs section. Okay. So I'm just going to go back here. So you see, I entered into this survey that we had one pre-licensure only assistant director and one assistant director that was shared across both programs. So the next question should give you the option to add the average weekly hours allotted to the assistant director that serves both programs and the assistant director that serves the pre-licensure program. And then it asks you how many hours they actually generally spend. And I did want to also mention about the table of contents. So the table of contents that you initially got was that big whole page of sections. You can get back to the table of contents. One way that you can do that is these three little horizontal bars that show up on the left side of the page there. Those little horizontal bars you can click on them. So if oops, now I gotta turn this thing off. If you click on them, you will find that it will either, open this table of contents bar, or it will close it up and hide it. And again, one of the things you'll see is it sort of tells you how far you are through the section right here. It tells you what section you're on in case you lose track, because sometimes some of these sections are really similar. They're just for different programs. And it tells you the question numbers in the section that you're on. And generally speaking, when you get done with one section, it'll just move sequentially down to the next section. But if you don't want to go to that section, you could actually, say, well, I'm doing pre-licensure administration and staffing right now, but I feel like I really want to go to BSN enrollment and admissions. So then you click on this, and that's where you'd go. Okay. And I need to get out of this little annotation thing. So let me just stop for a second here and close that. Thank you. Okay, great. And I'm going to clear all drawings. Thank you. The annotation thing is funny because you kind of have to turn it off to make it actually stop writing things. Okay, so another set of questions that we have for you in pre-licensure and post-licensure section are questions about staffing. And again, we're trying to keep these separate so that we get an idea of how many staff serve the post-licensure program versus the pre-licensure program. So if you have just a pre-licensure program, you're going to get questions about clerical support staff, clinical coordination staff, and a retention coordinator. And they will ask you, like, so for instance, how many of them you have. And here we want a head count. We don't want the FTE. And again, if you had a pre-licensure and a post-licensure, it would ask you about pre-licensure only clerical support staff and pre-licensure clerical support staff that serve both programs. And then clerical support staff that serve only the post-licensure program would appear in the post-licensure section. Okay. So the follow-up to this question, if you have any clerical support staff, if you don't, I think you don't get this question at all if you put 0 in the prior box. But the follow-up is how many hours do those clerical support staff contribute every week? And we're asking for, in this instance, the total number of hours. So for instance, if I had 2 clerical support staff and they each put in 40 hours, then the total number of hours I'd put in this box would be 80. And what I've tried to do is also program this survey so that, as you can see from this little arrow, I try to get it to tell you what you said in a previous question if you can't easily go back and look at that. Okay, so are there any other questions so far? I see a couple of chat questions. Okay, I'm going to double check on the question here about page 153. Generally speaking, when you're in the pre-licensure only section, it's asking you about pre-licensure only assistant directors and assistant directors that cover both programs. And then in the post-licensure section, it asks you about assistant directors that serve only the post-licensure program. And if there is a mistake on the survey in terms of what it specifies, I will double check that and I'll get back with the person who's posted the question. But I hope, does that answer the question somewhat? Okay, I'll wait till I see. I'm gonna move on, but if I get, okay, great. Okay, another section is, we're still just in the preliminary sort of general pre-licensure or post-licensure program survey area here. The faculty information, this is the real reason I think we split things back in two again, because it's a little easier to do survey validation with these types of questions split in half. And I know everyone hates survey validation, but I was getting a lot of answers with faculty that didn't add up, and then I'd have to call people back. So I'm trying to avoid doing that in the future. But when you fill out the survey, if you have a pre-licensure section, you should get a question that just asks you, how many full-time active faculty did you have that teach pre-licensure students? Now this section, if you have a post-licensure program as well, we want any faculty that teach any pre-licensure students. So even if you have faculty that say primarily teach pre-licensure students, but they teach a few post-licensure classes, that's fine, put them here. Let me see here. All right. However, if you have a post-licensure program, you're also going to get a question. Whoops, let me go back. Okay, so if you have a post-licensure program as well, we're first going to ask you how many of those pre-licensure faculty that you told us about also teach post-licensure students. So that's fine, you know, that covers that. And then we're going to ask you this question, which says, does your nursing school have any active faculty that teach post-licensure nursing students only? So if you don't have any, you hit no, and then it kind of skips you a few questions. If you have active faculty that teach only post-licensure nursing students, say yes, and then it will ask you some questions about those faculty. So again, if you have faculty that teach both pre and post-licensure students, that would have been covered back in the pre-licensure faculty section. This section, except for question 12, this section will really only cover questions about faculty that teach just post-licensure students. So past question 13, you will usually only get questions about post-licensure only faculty. I hope that's clear. If you have only a post-licensure program, you're not going to get any of those questions. You're just going to get like, how many active faculty did you have? And yes, even though right now it just shows a question for full-time active faculty, we do have a question about part-time active faculty as well. So I'm going to go to another section that tends to cause some dismay, which is attrition and completion. And again, for pre-licensure programs, we have broken down attrition and completion by race and ethnicity, which is really helpful for analysis of diversity and equity issues, but it's a little bit harder for people to fill out, I know. So in this first line at the top, the number of students scheduled on admission to complete the program, we just ask you to fill out the number of students scheduled on admission to complete the program between August 1st, 2019 and July 31st, 2020. And then in the next section down, we'd like you to let us know how many students amongst that group of students completed the program on schedule, either withdrew or dismissed, or are still enrolled in the program and probably not completing on schedule. And the total at the bottom should basically total what you gave us on that first question about number of students scheduled on admission to complete the program. Then after that, we ask you about a question about students who completed the program during that time period, but they were behind schedule. So they're probably from like a previous year's cohort that are finishing this year, the survey year. Okay, I'm going to answer that question in a minute. So one thing that has been, I think, a little confusing in the past is how we're measuring completion rates. And the attrition rates and the completion rates are posted on the BRN, the BRN's website. So it's important to get this right. And as you know, some of us have gone back and forth with various schools to make sure that it is correct, so that we reflect you as accurately as we can. And the completion rate is the number of students completing on schedule plus the number of students completing the program behind. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the completions. I'll give you the completion rate in a minute. Actually, let me go to completion rates first. So that's the number of students who completed on schedule divided by the number of students scheduled to complete. So the students who completed behind schedule are not included in the completion rate calculation. Okay. The other thing that I'm going to talk about, and it's going to sound a little complicated, so don't worry about it too much, but basically, in this question about attrition and completion, the number of students completing on schedule plus the number of students completing the program behind schedule should equal the number of students that you reported as completing in this time frame. I don't have any validation on there to force you to do that, and don't get too worried about it. The only reason I'm saying this is that last year I realized that for some schools, the number of students completing that were entered in the attrition and completion section was wildly off from the number of students completing. So we're trying to make sure that these numbers pretty much match up. Okay, so let me look at what questions we have. Okay. Okay, so I think we should, there's one question that says, is that post-licensure faculty teaching during the time frame of the survey? We have faculty that can teach across the curriculum, but some did not have any undergraduate classes between August 2019 and July 31st, 2020. And we're looking at active faculty. And so I believe we should look that up in the definition section because we do have a definition of active faculty. And I believe that we're talking just about faculty that are actively teaching at the time, but it would be useful to look that up. So I'm going to look that up in a minute. And somebody else asks, in the faculty section, pre-licensure and pre-licensure section, post-licensure and post-licensure. Okay, so another good question. So in terms of faculty, somebody's saying, is it just pre-licensure faculty in the pre-licensure section and post-licensure in the post-licensure section? What about faculty that teach both? So faculty that teach both go in the pre-licensure section. The pre-licensure section is covering faculty that teach students that teach any pre-licensure students. I mean, faculty that teach any pre-licensure students. So basically, that covers faculty that teach both. And the post-licensure section will, after question 13, ask only about faculty that only teach post-licensure students. Will the slides be available online for our reference? Yes, I can put the slides online or send them to people. We'll also have a recording of the webinar online. Great. Okay, we did add some questions and some answer categories to try to capture what's happening with COVID-19. This is a little bit challenging just because of, COVID-19 kind of happened in a certain point in the academic year. And, so we're trying to look a little bit at like what was planned to happen and maybe what ended up really happening. So I'm really, welcome. I've had some comments already from people about how to better structure these questions or, questions about what they mean. This is just an example of one of the questions that we added, looking at whether people, use the waiver with their clinical simulation or their clinical hours. There's another example is questions where we asked people, for instance, like barriers to program expansion. Was this a general problem or a barrier to program expansion, or was it a problem that came up specifically because of COVID-19? Again, we have some questions, I think a whole series of questions actually, where we ask whether certain things were occurring prior to COVID-19 and whether they were occurring after COVID-19 started. So they're the same questions we had before, they just have an extra column. And then there's actually different whole answer categories. So for instance, in this one, reasons for being denied a clinical placement unit or shift, what were the reasons given? We added some questions about COVID-19. And we also always have another box with a fill-in. So if this doesn't cover all of the things that might have been given as reasons for, say, for instance, being denied a clinical placement, you can always type that in. Then finally, when you get, all the way through the survey, you will get this big table of contents again. And if you have completed every section, there will be a check mark next to that section. I'm going to show this on two separate screens because this one was a really long hypothetical set of surveys. Okay, so as you can see, and I'll go back, this is a hypothetical with a BSN and I believe an MSN. So, this person has filled out all of the pre-licensure program survey, all of the BSN questions, all of the faculty information for, oh no, this is just BSN, sorry. So basically, there is a final process questionnaire that we ask people to fill out after you filled out all of the substantive material that just helps us try to improve this survey every year. And we keep trying to, make it better and make it easier. It is just really long and complicated, but we do our best to be responsive to people's input. So if you have something to say, go ahead and put it there. You don't have to do it, but it's really helpful. And then I think here when you hit next page, I also, let me stop for 1 minute here and say one other thing. The other way to get to the table of contents is down here by next page. That will give you the full table of contents. You can click here to get to the table of contents too. So that's one other way to get to the table of contents and navigate around the survey. And like I said, you can skip between these different sections. You do need to fill them all out eventually, but you can skip around a little bit to get to different categories of answers. Okay, so when you hit next page here, I think it will give you one more box, and then it will say, do you really want to submit this survey? And then you hit it and you've submitted the survey. So I see a couple of more questions. Now somebody says your question numbers are not correlating to my printed copy. Yeah, somebody else says that too. I'm not, well, I think part of that, okay, so when you're saying question numbers are not correlating to your printed copy, are you talking about in this presentation or in the online survey itself? Because I just kind of grabbed questions from all over the place to stick in this survey or in this presentation, and sometimes I'm using the BSN survey, sometimes the ADN survey, and a couple of the questions may actually have just stayed in there from last year just because they're basically the same. It's just, the numbers have changed. Because we did work really hard on trying to make the PDF match the survey itself. And if that's not happening, then we'll have to recheck that. So if anybody wants to answer in the chat box or unmute themselves, that would be fine. Oh, in this presentation. So I think they should match in the PDF and versus the online survey, but I think they might not match here just for the answers that I just gave. It's actually more challenging than you'd think to make them match. Okay, so sometimes there's some little flubs in there, but we did try to go over that several times this time. Okay, so when you get to the end here, and you've actually submitted your survey. Once you've submitted your survey, you really can't go back to it very easily. Like I have to send you a retake link. So if you get all the way through your survey and you get your survey copy and you think, oh my God, I totally blew it with that one. I need to get back in there and fix that. I can send you a retake link, and it's a little clunkier than the regular take the survey link, but it does take you back in there and you should be able to change your answers. One of the things that you'll get after you've submitted the survey, so it's good to not submit the survey until you're pretty sure you filled out everything accurately. Some people have said, well, why can't I get a PDF of what I filled out prior to hitting submit? I'm not really sure why that is, and I'm going to put some energy into trying to figure out if there's a way to do that, but as far as I know, there's not. So once you've submitted it, you get this screen that says thank you, et cetera, et cetera. It'll list all of your survey answers sort of down below here where you can't see just because it's cut off by PowerPoint. But it also gives you this little download button, and the download button is not real obvious, so I've circled it in red, but it's not circled in red on the screen. You hit download and you wait for a really long time, unfortunately. I think I've sometimes seen it go up to 3 to 5 minutes, and then you get, down here on the left-hand side, a downloadable PDF. And if you can wait that long and you can just kind of hope, sometimes I think maybe it does just fizzle out, but if you wait for a little while, usually you get it and then you can download it. And it's a pretty nice description of what you filled out. It looks nice, it's easier to read. If indeed you can't download it or you lose it, you can write me and I will send you a PDF, which will be a little more clunky looking, but it still records all your answers. So it's best to get it here, but if you can't get it here, I can get you another copy. I'll also note that you'll get a thank you email that confirms that you submitted this survey, and that too will have in it a list of all the answers you gave, but again, that one's a little hard to read. Okay, so I'm just going to note that the deadline to submit all survey responses is November 16th, 2020. You will receive an automated email with your survey responses, as I just noted, immediately after submitting the survey. And you will receive email reminders and phone calls if you have not completed this survey, especially by the beginning of November, just because we get worried as we get closer about getting all the data in. And part of the reason we're really concerned about getting the data in is just that I need to have the report done by December 20th. And it's 2 reports actually, and they're huge and they have to correspond, and there's lots and lots of data tables. And so it takes me quite a while to process all the survey data after I get it in. And so we will probably, I'll send a bunch of automated reminders, and then we may actually end up calling if we haven't heard from you by early or the first week in November. So at this point, I want to hand it back to Stephen Wong to talk a little bit about what happens with the data.
Okay, you know, the data that you guys, give the BRN, we basically provide, we basically get 2 several reports out of that. There are 2 statewide pre-licensure reports that are, that come on board on March 20th. The data summary and the historical trend analysis. There's also an online interactive dashboard where you can go onto the BRN's website and interact with the data graphically. We do post the school level data on the website with current institutional accreditation, current nursing program accreditation, and retention and attrition rates. There's also a post-licensure report that comes out later. And right now, the 2018-19 version of those reports are available on the BRN website. Next slide. Okay, well, that's about it. Thanks for attending. That's me, Steve Wong of the BRN, and that's my email, and that's Lisel Blash at UCSF, and that's her email. The PDF version of the survey is available online at the BRN's website at that URL address, and there's the BRN website's URL. Okay, I guess that's about it. So, any more questions?
Let me just double check. I see one in the chat. Okay, somebody just says thank you, and definitely I had a couple questions about troubleshooting this survey. And I think in my emails I've provided to people my phone number. Generally, the phone number that's working now is my cell phone because most of us are working from home at UCSF. And so get in contact with me by phone or email if you're having difficulties with the survey. And I'll also look up the one question about active faculty, but I'm pretty sure that we defined active faculty as people who are actually actively teaching students at this time. But I will double check on that. And I see one new message. Let's see. Okay, thank you. So are there any other questions at this point? Okay, well, thank you everybody so much for joining. Got some really great questions here that I will try to add to the technical assistance page. And I'll probably hear from some of you with questions, so that'll be nice. And yes, I will email the presentation to the attendees as soon as I get a little cleaned up so that the fly-in things don't cover up the rest of the material. So I will try to do that within the next couple of days. And again, we are having another webinar on the 13th. So if you have any colleagues that wanted to be at the webinar but couldn't come to it, we will be doing another one, but we'll cover the same material. So, unless you really need to cover that again, you don't need to come to that one again. Okay, take care, everyone. Talk to you soon, probably. Okay.